Welcome back. Today is Tuesday, September 27th, 2011, and this is the Pastel Pony Podcast. Welcome back, pony people. So, today we should have a much shorter podcast than we have in the past, just because I don't have a ton to talk about. Obviously, episode 2 was awesome. I really enjoyed it. All kinds of discord and harmony and happiness and wonder, and I'm not spoiling a thing. So, that being said, I talked a little bit last week about the phenomenon of mutual inspiration, which I think personally is a very interesting topic. I personally believe that that's the whole reason that we survived the 4-month drought in between seasons 1 and 2. Because without that, we wouldn't have had any new material for inspiring any of us to keep writing stuff. For example, with Common Skies, that author got a piece of fan art specifically devoted to their story. And although I'm not sure if it's actually devoted to mine, there's definitely a My Little Enterprise style picture of Captain Mainway out there, which mine is Captain Starway, but, similarities, so. And I definitely hear videos every once in a while that makes me want to go write a fic, or I see art that makes me think that would make a great story. For example, I actually saw a picture a couple days ago with the Doctor, Ditzy, Lyra, Bonbon, Octavia, and one or two others, and I just thought, this is the cast that I want to actually see. And if that's the cast that I want to see, I'm sure that obviously the artist wanted to too, and I was going to use that today and try to convince one of you to go write a fic about it, but then I woke up this morning and there it was. And we've sort of generated this perpetual motion machine where we created our very own self-sustaining community. If the next 20-some episodes are horrible, it still probably won't kill the fandom. We'll just stop watching it. And most of us won't stop watching it even if it is terrible, which, luckily, that doesn't seem to be the case. But that being said, we've got all of this wonderful stuff going on, and I think that I'd like to see your guys' opinion, but personally I think that it's as a result specifically of fics inspiring art, art inspiring fics, inspiring music, just that sort of thing. The music in our scene seems to be kind of self-contained, to be honest. But all of the other stuff sort of inspires things. And honestly, Equestria Daily is definitely a part of that, because the fics wouldn't inspire art the way that they do if we didn't have Equestria Daily, if we were just posting on fanfiction.net or something, or DeviantArt or whatever. But let me know what you guys think in the comments, or don't. Anyways, so next, I suppose, I will talk about what I've been reading lately for the weekly review, and then I'll be going over what actually got me into My Little Pony in the first place. But first, I will make the announcement I have finally given up. I'll be putting up the grimdark, horrible, terrible things on here, on this account, just not very often. Because to be honest, I don't like the live readings that much. After having done all of the editing for these things, they just come out so much nicer. They're much prettier, and they're fancy audio magic tricks that I can do, and they come off as better stories. And at the same time, I also really don't want to be reading those all of the time, because that's not my kind of story. I've never even seen the Saw movies because it's just not my cup of tea. It's all shock value. I mean, there's a lot of psychology that goes into Saw in the first one, but after that, it's the same movie over and over again, to me. And that comes, if you disagree, that comes specifically from a standpoint of I've never actually seen them. So don't get me wrong. It's just that I prefer sci-fi and fantasy, and the kind of stuff that we get generally from My Little Pony, as opposed to the authors that are basically writing cupcakes or something like them. So, I know you guys love that stuff. I will occasionally record those stories, and I will probably record another short story for that week for the people who don't really want to listen to them. So, that being said, I have been reading a lot lately. I read through some of Fell Into the Right Hooves, although it sort of lost my attention span after a while. I read all the way through Common Sky, which just got better and better, and then in Fragments, since I sort of went over the basic premise last week, Fragments is the continuation of Common Sky and begins to delve into Luna's psyche and what happens after Luna and Twilight start dating. If you like shipping and or psychology, pick it up. It's fantastic, and it's well written, and the author's definitely getting better as time goes on. I finished what's been written thus far of the Hourglass Society, which is also really cool. It feels a lot like Minority Report, to be honest. The author seems to be trying to give it sort of a James Bond, Doctor Who feel, but to me it comes off as more of a police force than it does a federal organization meant to police the world. So we'll see how it goes, but it's got a lot of deep characters thus far who already have developed personalities in like 3 chapters. So definitely something worth checking out. Obviously, I got to go through chapter 22 of Antipodes, which, to be honest, I don't remember much of now, since it's been about a week and 20 some odd fanfics since then, but keeping up with it, I don't want to spoil anything, especially because it's such a long story. Let's just say that even 10,000 years into the future, there is 1 or 2 ponies and 1 or 2 other things that carry over from the present. And that's made all the difference. Because I have come to really love OC characters, but at the same time, I also really enjoy watching the background characters get more developed, or even recently, I've started to really like the main 6 again, which may be a result of Season 2 coming out. I also read the next chapter of The Sound of Equestria, which is Octavia and Vinyl Scratch as fillies, as roommates at the Canterlot Music Academy. I can't really spoil anything by talking about it, but at the same time, it's more of a character-driven story, so there's not much plot after 2 chapters, but it reads well. And you really, even when the characters are being snippy or angry and out of character, they also come across as someone you might want to hang out with. And that's rare. So I think that's something to sort of go into. Sepia Talk finally finished. And I honestly thought that when it ended, it would involve Sepia Talk somehow actually being the Doctor. And it doesn't. And I was so pleased with that. I was so afraid that he would ruin it by just using a cop-out and being like, oh, Magic Watch, you're now the Doctor. You just didn't realize it. But he didn't do that. The author made it a Doctor Who story without being about Doctor Who at all. And at the same time, it felt really, really heavily character-driven My Little Pony, which I haven't seen anything that good for a while. However, then I found 2 other fics, which have been all-consuming and may eventually get read if it interests you bronies. So, in the comments, definitely let me know if either of these 2 interest you, because I would be more than willing to record them. One is Equestria War Z. 1 chapter out thus far, well written. It's a parody of World War Z, the oral history of the zombie war, by someone I can't remember at this point, but I'm sure you'll flood my inbox with it. The writer does a great job of making it a zombie story about ponies, but in Ponyville, so that it's not too dark, but It's got a good balance and a good mixture, and it still feels like both My Little Pony and the original World War Z. Now, the last one that I have been completely enthralled with and finished way too quickly, since it's still updating, is Death Note Equestria. I went through the original series during college in about 3 days while I was still trying to go to classes and do work and stuff. And when I was reading the fic about it, I saw the initial fic and thought, there's no way that I'm going to go through this. I'll read one chapter and I'll be done with it, and it'll just be terrible. There's no way that this can be well done. And as soon as I started reading it, I thought I was going to be proven right. But then, 3 paragraphs in, I couldn't put it down, and I used every lunch break at work for the next couple of days to get all the way through it. It is well written, it is true to both stories beyond belief, and it creates its own story that isn't either one. But at the same time, it also makes innovations that would be completely believable if My Little Pony was just a little bit darker in the real world. It's one of the few that I would give 5 stars that I've actually read. There aren't many. And finally, the last fic that I read recently was The Son of the Emperor. I majored in international studies. I focused heavily on politics and cultural and psychology of war. And really love, because I also love world building and creating that sort of stuff for D&D games, because I've been GMing for about 7 years now. When I see a fantasy world that is an alternate history, and then all of a sudden Equestria is in America during the end of Napoleon, that's about as much as I can say without giving anything away, but it's only got 1 chapter right now, and it's real dry for those of you who don't like history, but any of you who do should definitely check it out. It was good stuff. So, that leaves us with one last question before the end of this game, this wonderful game of a podcast, which is, what got me into My Little Pony in the first place? Well, a couple of things. The primary one is those of you who have listened to Cupcakes know or know of Mobius. Mobius is one of my good friends that has been involved in some of the recording process and will eventually be involved in more of it later on when there's more free time and space to do recordings, because right now I'm in a tiny room in my parents' house and don't yet have the money to move out. But when I do, I'll be able to record at better times to be able to involve other people. In the meantime, Mobius, I had lost my job, or rather, I was going to lose my job and couldn't continue working there because I couldn't focus. So I left. I didn't realize quite how bad the economy was. And there were a lot of more terrible things that I prefer not to just rant on about. The point being, I was in a fairly depressed state for a fairly long period of time, and Mobius, who's in the military, is one of my best friends, has been off and on as to whether or not he was available, and all of a sudden, he wasn't in training, he didn't have to work very often, and we were both bored all the time, and both of us were going through simultaneous psychological mind shifts. We were spending a lot of time with each other, counseling each other, and just sort of supporting each other. And making sure that the other was okay until they finally managed to move past stuff and hopefully find another job. So, without going into any more detail, basically the typical story of many bronies out there. Life sucks right now. I'm bored. I don't have anything to do. And Mobius had been watching for a while, and season 1 was already over about 2 weeks prior to us picking it up. I hadn't heard a single thing about it, to be honest. And the only thing that I had heard was a couple months earlier when Mobius got drunk in my basement and decided to rant at one of my friends about how he needed to watch My Little Pony, except it was much less coherent than that. And it was very, very entertaining. And he pretended to be the Mighty Bearicorn and just sort of derp-herded my cats. And I didn't really think about it much after that. I never saw the memes online. I never saw the discussions because I don't spend that much time on the internet, to be honest. Well, I didn't spend as much time on it as I do now. But after that, it just sort of, it trickled for a little bit until it became a flood. Because I gave it 2 or 3 episodes, as I will give most things at least a fair shot. But one of my friend's reactions that Mobius had showed it to was to immediately start drinking and be drunk halfway through the first episode, shouting, "Why are the ponies singing?" And so I didn't expect much from it. I had the typical reaction. It's a show for girls about ponies, and there's lots of pink. Then I gave it 3 episodes, and I didn't think much of it. But I was bored, and I didn't have anything else to do, and Mobius wanted to hang out again. So I gave it 2 or 3 more episodes. And then, after that, because we watched it in order, and the ratings on Equestria Daily for what you should watch first hadn't come out yet. Now, we know better, and the people we have introduced since then, it's been much easier because we didn't necessarily start out with some of the slower episodes. There's a lot of characters you have to warm up to, like Rarity and Applejack. At least for me. Although they became my favorites later on, it's much easier to relate to Twilight and to be entertained by Pinkie Pie and Dash and Fluttershy. So, that being said, as soon as I'd given it about 6 episodes, I didn't want to stop, and I went through the rest of it in about a day. Then, all of a sudden, there was none left. And after a couple of days, I thought, this will be fine. But then it wasn't. It wasn't fine, as most of you know, because most of you are listening to me for reasons other than simply cupcakes. It's because you also want more. So, I went to Equestria Daily once. I've never read fanfics other than My Immortal, and that was for recording purposes. I never saw a need to, but I thought that it would ruin the canon, and so I always sort of avoided fanfiction. That's all Equestria Daily posted, or it seemed like it, for a while, and I've never been a huge fan of music videos or just fan artwork. But I got bored and spent a little more time on Equestria Daily and gave it 1 or 2 fics. I don't remember what it was that I first... Oh, it was Black and White. Black and White was the first thing that Mobius convinced me to read. And all of a sudden, that was all I needed. That was it. As soon as I read a fic about Octavia, I was hooked. I needed more about the background ponies because I already knew about the main 6. Why should I know more? Which is why I haven't gotten back to them until recently. And now, all of a sudden, I'm checking Equestria every morning. 2 weeks later, I'm checking it a couple of times a day. Fast forward a little longer than that, and I'm doing fan artwork. I've started my own cafe press store. I've made a large painting of the formation of Equestria, and I have started applying for voice work on different mods. Well, then, fast forward until a couple of weeks ago, when it occurs to me that I haven't got much voice work. ModDB is dry. I'm waiting for the game that I'm working on with some other ponies to call me back and say, look, we actually need voices now. And I need something to sort of entertain me on my days off. So I start thinking that I can read fanfics and post them somewhere. Well, I record cupcakes because Mobius had been staying over the night, and terrible decisions happen when you have two bronies bored out of their skulls. So, later, I thought maybe I can do this for stories that don't horrify me, and actually provide good audio renditions of some of this stuff. So, then, I'm checking Equestria Daily, not only a couple of times a day, but my phone's got ponies. My desktop has a rotating background every hour of 2,000 plus images, and I'm checking fanfics on my phone and reading them while I work out. So, I guess it was sort of gradual decline to the point where I've sort of reached a homeostasis and am at an even keel of, now, this is what I do. I have my days for working on this stuff. I read fanfics on my days off. And I'm usually working on my days when I'm not doing this. So that's sort of the way that it happened. That's my story. I'm glad you listened. Thanks for sticking around. This is Vos de Sueños signing off. Have a great evening.